Excellent. Well, why don't we kick off?
Yeah.
And go with that. So first of all, welcome everyone. Hello. I think you guys have all been started out basically on mute accordingly. And I'm Marco Del Carlo, CEO of Capacity Place. Joining me is one of my colleagues, Leo Ramberg, who's there. Leo, you want to give a wave? That's great. So this session today is going to be recorded, and afterwards we'll make the video available to everyone so that you can, if you want to look back on what the video is, that's great. What we're going to do is we're going to go through a presentation, and then we're going to go through an online demo of Capacity Place, and I'll show you a few things in terms of how it all works. And I'm going to send out the presentation afterwards as well to all the meeting participants. So in that way, you'll have a video, you'll have a presentation, you'll have all the information that you need, and that way allows you to speak. In terms of Q&A, we'll do. So I'll stop at periodic points if you guys want to ask some questions along the way, and we can ask also questions at the end. There's also a chat facility that's on here that Leo is going to monitor. So if you do have questions that you just want to punch in and ask, you can do that as well. I think that's about it. The intention is that I'll speak for around 40 minutes or so, but then with questions that are being added, then we'll add those in as well. I'm sure there's a lot of questions that people have that'll be of interest to other people too. So don't hold back on questions around that, particularly if you think it's going to be of relevance to a lot of people. Does that sound good?
Yeah. Yep. Are we hearable?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay.
Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to share a screen and go into PowerPoint presentation. And I'm going to see if I can figure out how to minimize all this. Hide thumbnail video. Great, or just do it really small. As we still try to figure out how to use half of this stuff to make it, I'll just do thumbnail. I'll do small. Okay.
I think you're doing wonderful.
So far, so good, eh? All right.
I haven't been in this process. Wonderful. Yeah, good.
So we're learning as we go along in terms of this. I think this is our second webinar. First one went well as well. And I think everyone found it quite useful when we had it a couple of weeks ago. So what we're going to cover off today is all about sourcing program capacity with Capacity Place. So if you're on the call, you're likely either looking for capacity for yourself or for clients, one of the two. And looking at an alternative way, you've probably looked at Capacity Place and been intrigued in terms of interest. And so hopefully today what we'll do is we'll go through some of the how does it actually work, why we set this up, et cetera, et cetera. So the agenda for today is first I'll cover off what the traditional program placement process looks like. Then I'm going to cover off what our approach is to accelerating program placements, a big aspect of it, what we do in terms of matching programs and marketing to capacity providers, so how do we get the word out there. Talk about business-sensitive information. Everybody who's got programs has got a lot of sensitive information that they don't want to share, so how do we then guard against that getting into the wrong hands. Then I'll walk you through the process of how do we create a program listing, then give you a demo of different aspects of the platform in terms of the public site. How does it look from a capacity seeker perspective? How does it look from a capacity provider perspective? How does it all work, basically?
Okay. Marco, is it possible for you to get a microphone a little bit away from your mouth, because
is it too loud?
Yeah, sometimes yeah. Otherwise, it looks like it hears like you were in the middle of a hurricane. So
I could try pulling it out and just using my mic up here. Let me just.
No, it's
is that all right like this?
But it's just
Okay.
Yeah, but a little bit more to your mouth is better, but not in your mouth almost. Yeah.
Okay.
The mic. Yeah.
All right. And Leo, you can see the chat there, facility? I just want to see because there's people.
Yeah, I can, yep.
Okay, great. Okay. So just flag up if there's anything that you want to go through. Okay, so just to give everyone a quick background, you guys probably looked a little bit at Capacity Place, and it's sort of a relatively new concept that's out there in terms of what we're trying to do basically is bring those that are looking for capacity together with those that are providing capacity, and we basically divide the world into two. Our main focus is around delegated authority transactions or placements, but could also be handled for treaty and in due course certain runoff transactions. There's lots of different types of companies that are out there that are looking for capacity. You're probably one of them in terms of, our key audiences are typically is different types of brokers, MGAs, MGUs, management teams, so companies that don't even have anyone set up, or you could actually be a reinsurance buyer looking for reinsurance capacity for an insurance program. So all those different types, if you will, fall into the category of I'm looking for capacity. And what we're trying to do is match that up with different capacity providers in the market, each of whom have different types of risk appetites. So insurers, reinsurers, Lloyd's underwriters, fronting carriers, ILS funds, PCCs, ICCs, and mutuals. The majority of who we have up on the platform right now, we've got about 42 risk carriers up on the platform today. Most of them tend to be insurers today with a few Lloyd's syndicates, a few reinsurers, and a couple of fronts. And that's now starting to fill out basically in terms of different types of carriers accordingly. Every carrier's got different risk appetites based on what their existing portfolios look like and based on what their licenses look like and based on what their ratings look like. So a lot of what Capacity Place is trying to do is bring parties together that are trying to put a capacity placement together. And in that way, sometimes we call it Match.com for insurance programs. And what that means is that it's focused on solving the capacity issue, not necessarily trying to focus on the transactional sort of structure, if you will, of that. There are downstream platforms like PPL, like Whitespace, that handle that. What we're trying to do is get the marketplace together to make sure that if you've got a program that's out there, it's finding counterparties, finding capacity providers that are interested in assuming the underwriting risk accordingly. In order to be a capacity provider on Capacity Place, you have to be employed by an authorized risk carrier. So if you're not employed by an authorized risk carrier, then you can't be a capacity provider. Hope that helps provide just a bit of overview or explanation to start with. Okay, so I just want to touch on the traditional program placement process. I'm sure a lot of you guys are going to be familiar with this. So, basically, if you're looking for capacity, these would be the normal steps that you would take. You do a lot of, I kind of group them into pre-placement, placement, post-placement activities. So before a placement, you're actually usually going through a lot of business planning, actuarial analysis, collecting all the information that you need in order to go into the placement process. From there, you then typically go through and say, well, which markets are going to be interested potentially in this? You then contact those markets, develop relationships accordingly, exchange some information. If there's interest, you then go into more of a due diligence effort. Once that's done, you go into, further detail around the actual, binder line slip agreements and sign off of all the various other forms, ratings accordingly, and agree all the commercial terms in terms of any facility that happens to be there and the commercials go with it. Once that's done, then you go into post-placement where where you actually have to implement, usually have to implement a lot of whatever the agreement is in terms of operations governance, establish meetings, establish how you handle premium and bordereau processing, and then subsequently deal with audits and claims accordingly, depending on what the scope of the agreement actually is. So everyone will be fairly familiar with what that looks like. Now, what we see kind of, we call it behind the scenes at capacity providers. What most that are in the capacity seeker world, are often frustrated with is the amount of time that everything takes. And what we see is sort of behind the scenes. There's a bunch of things that take place at capacity providers that are really slowing things down, and there's been a lot of changes in recent years. So just an example of this here. In this example, what we've got is a cover holder working with a placing broker. A placing broker is often dealing with a business developer or someone within the organization who then is dealing with the underwriter. So usually there's already a chain that's out there. If an underwriter says, and looks at a particular book and says, right, this looks of interest, they typically need to go to an underwriting committee to see, yeah, that's of interest, and then at that point in time, they then usually have to consult loads of different departments. And it used to be 10, 15 years ago, underwriters could make decisions within risk carriers. Nowadays, unfortunately, there's so many other parties that need to be involved. All these other departments have really grown, and so the underwriter then needs to consult actuarial, compliance, delegated underwriting, finance, legal, wordings, and the like. And a lot of these consultations that are taking place is often slowing everything down. And then usually once they've done that, the underwriter then goes back to the placing broker, going back to the cover holder, et cetera, to say, look, I need more information about this, and this. And so the cover holder then provides more information that goes back to the placing broker, goes back to the business developer, goes back to the underwriter, et cetera. And so very long time frames, big concerns around information being passed from one party to another, and concerns around information leakage all the way through the chain. But if there is interest, basically what we do is we can continue on with that process until such time that everybody's happy. It goes back to underwriting committee for program approval. Sometimes there's reinsurance placements that need to be agreed, et cetera. And then if it's a Lloyd's book on top of that, there's often there's a set of separate Lloyd's approvals that is needed if for cover holders and business plans. So it's been kind of a long, painful process, and what often most capacity seekers don't realize is the amount of extra work and effort that is involved with capacity providers nowadays. A lot of those requirements have evolved over time, mainly because of new solvency requirements, conduct requirements, ratings agency requirements, and this has become a very information-intensive process, what used to be historically a relationship-based process. So that's sort of kind of behind the scenes what everybody sees it in the capacity provider world. Just to summarize sort of those things. We just put a bunch of key takeaways here, key observations. Delegated authority placements are we often think of them as insurance risks, but actually they're more similar to M&A transactions where you're sharing a lot of confidential information. You go through teasers, then you go into sort of due diligence where there's NDAs that are signed and you're exchanging transactions, because it's really more about a business partnership than anything else, where there's concerns around sharing of that information all the way through the chain. As we mentioned, information requirements have skyrocketed over the last 10 years. Departments at risk carriers have proliferated, massively time-consuming to find the right people. The process, that's just a process for one insurer. So, you now multiply that out every time you need to have multiple capacity on board. It just takes a long time accordingly. Underwriters themselves that are at risk carriers who used to be able to make decisions, equally many times they're frustrated because they're no longer there in a position to make decisions. They've effectively become internal project managers, having to corral and coordinate lots of different departments. So it's been very frustrating equally for many people internally within many of the risk carriers. Placement timeframes have absolutely elongated. I think everyone has seen that. What's probably the bigger issue is that there's more declinatures that are happening, often because many of those other departments that are need to be consulted typically sort of have a veto power often over different programs, and those declinatures are happening. But what's terrible if you're a capacity seeker is that many of the times they're actually taking place in later stages of the process. And so you kind of sit there. Sometimes I feel like if you're a capacity seeker, you kind of wait. And then, after 6 months, then someone comes back and says, oh, I'm sorry, we can't do this. There's a lot of 11th hour decisions as such. And so it's very frustrating. And the process is a frustrating process. So that's kind of how I characterize today in terms of what does it look like. In terms of what we're trying to do, we're basically trying to, sometimes I describe it as, how do you take a 9-month process and get it down to 2? That's what we're trying to do with Capacity Place. And the way that we do that is a number of different ways. First of all, we use marketplace technology and digital marketing to get more capacity providers interested right away. And so the difference I think now is that when you're in the traditional sort of placement process, what you're doing is you're going out linearly or sequentially to to one insurer, the next insurer, the next insurer. You have to set up meetings, et cetera, et cetera. Here what we're doing is we're putting this onto a technological platform that is then reachable immediately and accessibly by a number of different capacity providers right away. And what that means is that rather than the normal process of trying to set up meetings, et cetera, it's immediately available. And what we're trying to do is create competition for programs. Right now, in the market, basically there's, the capacity providers are in a much stronger position than capacity seekers. So what we're trying to do is invite more competition. So when you have multiple parties around the table, you can actually then start to say, look, if you're not going to move on this, these guys are going to move on this accordingly. So it's one of the things that we're trying to do. We've designed it so it can find the right underwriter quicker, and that's done through a whole set of referrals and other mechanisms, which I'll come on to. We try to efficiently and intelligently match programs with risk appetites, and I'll come in a little bit in terms of how we do it. And rather than trying to be a broker to do this, what we're doing is in capacity places saying, you go up and you put up your program. We're facilitating direct relationships. So once a capacity provider says, there's a program, I'm interested in it, it's direct communications between the parties. And that then stops a lot of the handoffs that typically take place. And again, just doing those sorts of things takes months off what's a typical placement process. The second thing that we do is that we're asking a lot more questions up front. So usually when you go through a placement process, like traditionally, you're concerned about the information that you're sharing in terms of it getting into the wrong hands. You don't know who it's going to go to. You're passing it to somebody. It goes via email. It could go to anyone. And there's a lot of real concerns that are there. And having run an MGA for several years, I certainly had all those concerns as well. So what we've done here is by enabling that direct communication, if you will, a lot of those concerns go away. But then what we also do is ask a lot more questions that are up front that are needed not just by the underwriter, but a number of those other departments that need that information. And in so doing, we're reducing the number of back forth that exists. And that's quite important because that's where there's a lot of elapsed time that is usually taken with program placements. The third thing that we do is we provide a range of free templates. If you actually look on the site, and I'll show you the template library afterwards, there's a whole bunch of templates that are available for business plans, for underwriting guidelines, and the like. And the intention of that is to actually improve the quality of documentation. The biggest frustration that most risk carriers have is they look at programs and they're frustrated because they're like, this doesn't have the information I need. What I'm looking for is this, and this. So we've designed this specifically for program placements, and if you follow a lot of those templates or you use them just basically as cross-references against your own, a lot of times it'll give you a lot of ideas to say, this information here should be provided. And it's not necessarily that it's needed from an underwriting perspective, but again, it comes down to all those other departments, actuarial, legal, wordings, and the like. So utilizing that massively expedites it. And interestingly enough, one of the things that we're seeing is those that are going through this process and providing a lot more information are getting a lot more interest from many carriers. The last thing that we do is we accelerate organizational due diligence by having a data room. So for those that are familiar with M&A transactions, in an M&A transaction, basically you go through, if you're selling a company, you put together a teaser, someone says, I'm interested, and then they go through a due diligence process. And as part of that, they'll typically put a whole bunch of commercially sensitive information into a data room to be able to be accessible by the potential acquirers. So we use the same concept here of having a data room and make that accessible by multiple departments within the capacity providers themselves. And what that means is that rather than information flying around, the entire capacity providers got access to the same sources of data, and so misunderstandings are minimized. The amount of everybody can see the same information all the way through, so it massively expedites the the logistical aspects of due diligence. So those are some of the ways in which what we're trying to do, coming back to it, is how do you get a 9-month process down to 2? So just going on, so the way that it works in Capacity Place is that if you're a capacity seeker, you come in and you create a program listing. You go through an 8-stage guided questionnaire, which I'm going to walk you through in a second in terms of how that works. Once you've completed the questionnaire and it gets authorized and approved, it then goes live onto the platform. At that stage, what we do is we then match that up with different capacity providers and market it out to them in a number of different ways. Give me 1 second here. And I'm going to just show you exactly kind of what we do there. At that stage, once capacity providers look at a program and say, that's of interest, I've looked at it, then what they do is they then contact the capacity seeker either by way of chat, call, email, and the like, and then you do a get to know each other sort of process. And at that stage, if a capacity seeker, a capacity provider getting on, the capacity provider can then say, can I have access to your data room? And the capacity seeker can grant access to the data room. They can decline access. Once they have granted it, they can then revoke it later on. So it provides much greater control accordingly in terms of the process. And you can also agree an NDA. It's a process that we're looking to automate in due course, again, just to provide another level of security. Once that's done, as is normal, you go through the due diligence contractual process that we just talked about in terms of capacity providers. Then typically an underwriter can share that with a colleague to bring them into the placement process. And again, there's some additional templates that are available. We also have something called a capacity tracker that you'll see up there. And this is really where once you start talking with multiple capacity providers, you kind of want to keep track of that. So if you're talking with AXA, Aviva, Allianz, Arch, 15 other carriers to start with A, then what you can do then is it will then start to track that to say these are the capacity providers that are interested and at the different stages of your discussion in terms of where you're at. So have they looked at your profile? Have you engaged in conversations? Have you started that? Have you then granted them access? Are you in due diligence? Are you at contractual negotiation stage? So it helps you basically match that. That's something that that is currently in development. We haven't got that up and running yet, but that's something that's on our development pipeline right now. So the key thing here is really around matching programs and marketing capacity providers. So once you've created a program listing, then the way that capacity providers find that program is kind of one of 4 different ways, and this is what they are. So the first one is online, filter, and sort. So much like if you were on eBay, Amazon, any sort of marketplace, Zoopla, Rightmove, and the like. Basically, there are ways here that you can then the capacity providers can come online and they can search for certain keywords. They can filter that based on class, based on territory. They can sort programs based on a number of different factors that are out there. So that's the first way in which capacity providers find the program, and we have some that are doing that right now. The second one is around program, we call it a program opportunities email. And we just, actually the first program opportunities email just went out today, in fact, where any registered capacity provider basically gets a listing of the programs that are on Capacity Place that are the most recent and the ones that fit best with their risk appetite. And so, and I might show you what that looks like in a bit, but basically we know that, our experience has been that most capacity providers tend to be, tend not to be proactive in terms of looking at it. They tend to be reactive in terms of if there's an opportunity that's there, then they're interested in pursuing it. So what we're doing is we're making sure that goes right to their inbox. So the program opportunities email comes out once a week, typically on a Monday morning. So Monday morning, in their inbox, they see that. And if they see a program that fits with what they're looking for, they click on it. Once they click on it, that then that then takes them right to Capacity Place where they can look through the details of that program. And if they're interested, they contact you. The third thing that we're doing is we call it program marketing. So there's a number of capacity providers right now that aren't on Capacity Place yet. So what we do there is we actually provide additional marketing support for them. So for certain programs, what we'll do is we'll write out a brief email to say, here's a program that we think fits your risk appetite. So it's very targeted in terms of approach. Here's a few bullets on the program. If you want to go look at it, it's on Capacity Place. Here's the link on Capacity Place for you to go look at it. For them to do that, they then need to register on Capacity Place accordingly, which then gives them access to a number of programs. So it's what we're doing basically to get more capacity providers on the platform generally. The last thing that we're doing is we provide recommendations to different capacity providers of different programs, and we use an algorithm, a matching algorithm that takes classes and looks at class relevance of the program against what the matching preferences are of the capacity provider. So basically, when a capacity provider logs in and registers, what they do is they indicate these are the classes and these are the territories that I'm interested in. So a capacity provider might come in and they might say, I'm interested in European motor business because that's what I write. Somebody else might come in and they might say, I write U.S. D&F business, property D&F. Someone might come in and say, I'm interested in UK schemes business. So each one of those is very different. So what we're looking to do is match what the capacity providers are looking for with relevant programs accordingly. And that's much the same way that an eBay and Amazon work in terms of better matching those together. And so that's now live on the platform in terms of those capabilities. So we use that capability online accordingly on the site, and also are integrating that in with the opportunities email that goes out. And again, it's all about how do you get your programs right in front of capacity providers, more capacity providers that are going to be interested. I know I just keep talking, and I realized I said I was going to stop for a few pauses to see if there was any questions. Is there any questions at this stage, or Leo, if you've got anything from the chat that's out there that you wanted to go through?
Yeah, I think Kieran's expressed interest on the ILS funds to become a capacity provider via the platform, but I think it's something that we can cover in the Q&A.
Okay.
Is that okay, Kieran?
Oh yeah, that's all fine. Whatever is easier. I think probably better in the Q&A. It's probably less going back and forth.
Yeah.
Okay.
Cool.
All right. So is that right? Okay, yeah. So one of the questions that we often get is all about, how do we safeguard a lot of business sensitive or commercially sensitive information? It's just something I want to explicitly cover off because I'm sure it's a concern of many of you. It's certainly a concern of mine, and we've designed the platform specifically to safeguard business sensitive information. So first thing is that only capacity providers have access to program listings. In order to be a capacity provider, you need to be employed by an authorized risk carrier. So what this means is that anybody else that's not a capacity provider, as in brokers, MGAs, anyone else that's listed, if you will, that's on there, doesn't have access to your program listings. So that's the first thing. So the only people that can see it are people that are in a position to actually provide capacity. That's the first thing. Second thing is that you can hide your program listings from specific risk carriers or unrated carriers. So we call this, you see a little graphic on the side, we call this the Ashley Madison feature. The Ashley Madison feature really comes from the concept of if you were looking to have an affair and you went to a dating site, who is the one person that you wouldn't like to see your dating profile?
Your mother-in-law.
Exactly, that too. Actually, I hadn't thought about that. So basically, generally speaking, you don't want your mother-in-law seeing it. You don't want your spouse seeing it. You probably don't want any crazy ex-girlfriend seeing it as well. Nor your mistresses. So there's a number of people you probably don't want seeing your dating profile. So we have the same situation in our world of capacity seekers and capacity providers. If you're a capacity seeker, there's a number of different capacity providers that you don't want seeing your program. And you have existing capacity providers that you're saying, look, what I'm really looking for is incremental capacity to what we've got today. So I don't want them looking at my profile. I've got competitors in the market. Well, I don't want them looking at and fishing around for information. Sometimes when you got a management team, they've come out of certain employers, or if you're talking with certain capacity providers offline, then you don't want them also looking at your program listing. So we've got an ability here to being able to do that. Behind Capacity Place, there's a database of 13,500 risk carriers. So the way it works is that you come in and you say, well, it's available to everyone that's on there except for the ones that I have decided that I'd like it hidden from. So you go through and select the ones that you don't want to be able to see your program. When capacity providers are register, they have to indicate which risk carriers they represent. So from that, we basically exclude those from if they're logging in or they receive emails, they can't see those particular programs accordingly. Like they're blocked it basically from that, from doing that. It's just hidden from their view. And so that way, what Capacity Place does is it's designed to bring incremental capacity relationships to what you currently have. So the third thing, and I think we touched on it before, was just in Capacity Place, you put very commercially sensitive information into the data room. And if it goes into the data room, you specifically control who gets access to your data room. And so you grant access, you can revoke access accordingly on an individual basis. So even if there's a capacity provider that's out there, they still have to request access to your data room. So you're the gatekeeper on that. And again, that just means it's just another level of protection. Last but not least is that you can also request an NDA. At the moment, we have an NDA template in our template library. This is something that we're looking to automate in terms of a process so that when a capacity provider requests access to your data room, they'll say, here's the NDA to sign or negotiate accordingly. We haven't quite got that capability yet, but it's on the roadmap in terms of what we're looking to do. Now we often get a few different questions around from different people, which is how do I structure my program? And many of you will be familiar with these different alternatives, but there are some programs whereby they're just simple structures, and that's where you've got one capacity provider, one capacity seeker that's out there, and that's typically used in the U.S. programs market, UK broker schemes, and typically we have larger insurer groups like Zurich, et cetera, or Hanover. They want to do everything 100%. That's how the model works, if you will, and so that's one sort of stream, if you will. Then you've got others, which is around co-insurance arrangements. And co-insurance arrangements, for those that are involved in London market, typically you'll have a slip, you'll write, and what you're looking for is everybody take a percentage. You'll have the lead follow model that's on that. And many times, if you're looking to diversify capacity, one of the ways of doing it is in this way, where you're saying, look, I want to bring someone else onto the same program, and what I want to do is increase that accordingly. Third one is what we call sectioned. So some programs lend themselves where there's different carriers out there who've got different risk appetites. It could be the property versus liability. It could be primary versus excess. There's a number of different areas where you might have what we sometimes call Section A, Section B, accordingly. And so sometimes it's worthwhile saying, okay, well, there's different markets that are out there for doing different things. Interesting enough, Kieran just asked about ILS. Well, ILS has certain risk appetites that are, which is all short tail, high rate online business. That's very different than what a reinsurer would look for. It's very different than what insurers are looking for, and everybody's always looking for something different. So again, it's one of those ones where Section A, Section B can help make a program more marketable rather than trying to say we want to do everything. Another way of thinking about Section A, Section B as well is in terms of if you write a book of business that is very wide geographically, sometimes carriers are looking for limited territorial scope, and because they're going to have their own programs, and they may write similar type of program, and so what they're looking for is incremental distribution against what they currently write today. So, covering off a wide program where you're saying, I want to cover all of Europe might not work, but saying, I just want to cover off Southern Europe or Northern Europe or just Ireland or just the UK or the Spanish-speaking market, or dividing it up like that can sometimes make it more attractive to different carriers accordingly, because it overlaps less with what they currently write. The last sort of general structure is a fronting structure. And this is sort of dividing up the, call it capacity versus paper. So capacity is all about who takes the underwriting risk, and paper is who's got the licenses that are available. Right now, one of the things that, that we see is that the reinsurance markets right now have an awful lot of capacity that's available. The reinsurers have been sort of sandwiched, if you will, in the market. On one side, the ILS funds have been cherry picking, taking all the very high margin property, nat cat risks that can be written on a single risk basis accordingly, or that are very high rate online accordingly. So they've been cherry picking it from that side. At the same time, many of the insurers have been growing and growing and growing in terms of structure, a lot of times through M&A, and they're then retaining more risk internally. And as they retain more risk, the amount of risk or premium that's being ceded to the reinsurance markets is actually less. So the reinsurers right now have been getting, riskier business generally being fed to them, and there's less of it. So the reinsurers themselves typically have a lot more capital or capacity that's available today. So in order to make that structure work, it needs a fronting model in order to make that happen. That fronting model is quite common in the U.S. marketplace and in certain areas around the world, but particularly in the U.S. Accordingly, and less relevant or less prevalent certainly in Europe generally. There's a number of unrated fronts. The fronting market has dropped off considerably in recent years, and there's a couple of rated fronts that are available, but it's been a tight marketplace as such. These are sort of the generic kind of structures, if you will, that are out there, and that equally each one of those could be joined together in terms of having section fronted co-insurance arrangements depending on what the structure looks like. So as you start thinking about your programs, these are just different ways of thinking about, is there a different way of doing this, and as such that can really help. Okay, so one of the things we talked about was creating a program listing. So this process has been designed. It's a big long question set basically where you go through, and I know that there's probably about a third of the people right now that are on this call that have registered, added some programs, tried this out accordingly, and probably I guess about 2/3 haven't. This is the process that you go through basically, and I'm going to touch on each very quickly. Stage one is all about capacity seeker profile. So it's basically asking, who are you as a company, as a management team, and the like. So it can be used by insurance intermediaries, non-insurance intermediaries, management teams, or reinsurance buyers. Details about your particular company, what trading bases do you have, what credentials and memberships do you have. So if you're a capacity provider that doesn't know the people that are there, actually just saying, here's who we are and how long we've been in business and the like, actually establishes a huge amount of credibility. Stage two then comes into program profile. So are you writing direct business, FAC, treaty? What classes and territories are covered under this particular facility? Are there particular Lloyd's risk codes? In terms of product details, what coverages, limits, deductibles, does the program actually cover? What's the distribution profile for this? Is it coming from brokers, from aggregator sites? Is it coming from clients directly? Is it coming from affinity groups? What does it look like? How do you underwrite the risks? Is it all automated and quoted? Is it single risk business? What is the process that you actually go through? What's your operating model look like? So your people, processes, technologies that sit behind it. Is any business impacted by sanctions? If you're dealing with sanctions business, certain carriers can look at it, certain carriers can't, depending on latest sanctions regulations. Stage three then comes into KPIs and financials. So the first question we always ask is about maturity stage of the program. What we find is that from a risk carrier perspective, there's definitely different appetites that are out there. Maturity stage, we have sort of a 5-stage maturity spectrum from a startup to, it's an extension of an existing book, to it's experienced, to it's well established, to it's quite mature. And different carriers definitely have different, every carrier would ideally like, beautifully mature books of business. But many times that's just not the reality of the opportunities that are out there. Often what you see is that there's different teams that are moving from one company to another. They've got books of business, but they don't have the detailed data around those particular books of business. So there's sort of a high level information that's available, but not necessarily detailed. Many carriers are very interested in that. Some carriers aren't. And so what we're trying to do is make that available and ready for them. And again, just improve the marketability of the particular program. Then we ask sort of these, what's the program premium in terms of expected premium on the book? Some carriers have got minimum premiums. Other ones, if it's a smaller carrier, typically they're not looking for something too large. Many other ones are just like, we only want to look at things that are very large, and it all depends on what their current bases are. Then we go into 4 sections around underwriting performance, premiums, policies, claims losses, and operational KPIs. Those 4 sections are really about providing carriers with top-level information as to what does this book look like. Why does it look the way it does? And generally, most carriers, that's the bit of information that helps them quickly assess, this is of interest for us, or no, it's not, accordingly. Just to show you what those look like, these are what is being asked basically on the next slides. So for stage 3 KPIs for historic performance and projections, it's looking at sort of, a few years back, 2-3 years back, a couple years ahead in terms of premium, loss ratios, top level type information. Policies and premiums, so again, just sort of a split at the top level to say what does the book actually look like in terms of whatever the split may happen to be accordingly. So you can see here, it's, how many policies, what's the premium income. You don't have to follow this. You can put in, whatever you choose, but this is the, we find that most carriers actually look at it and they go, based on this, they're more interested if you've actually given them valuable information or information that they can then see that is that helps them understand the profile of the book, because many of them will write either similar books and they're trying to assess, is this book incremental, does it fit with what we're doing, et cetera, et cetera. Claims and losses, again, we just try to do top level information. How many claims notified, reported, paid, outstanding, what's the value of the claims, average cost per claim. Every book will be a little bit different in terms of how it looks, but we're just trying to say, here's some top level information so that carriers have got a sense of this is what the book looks like. And then operational KPIs in terms of the business profile and different conversion rates that you see on your business. Stage 4 then comes into supporting information. So it's what information do you have that even if you go down into the due diligence process, what information do you actually have available that's going to help this later on? And a lot of these actually serve as an aid memoir for, do you have this bit of information? Do you have this? Do you have this? One of the things that we found is that, it used to be that relationships were really driving the whole industry, but now it's like relationships and information really is the key to massively expediting capacity behind different books of business. So there's a series of questions that are being asked, which are basically tick box questions, which is, do you have this corporate information available? Do you have this historic performance information? Forward-looking, do you have business and financial plan information, competitor analyses, RDSs? Do you have underwriting guidelines, claims handling guidelines, operations, flows? Do you have agreements that are in place? Do you have these informations available on a compliance and governance basis? So it's asking a lot of questions, which is, what do you have that's available to say that if carriers are interested, this information can be made available insofar as reviewing the program is concerned. At that stage, there's 2 repositories that are here. You'll see public documents and data room. So both of those are just separate repositories where you can upload information. Public documents is for non-commercially sensitive information. So there you might, if you think it'd be helpful for potential capacity providers to understand your organizational structure, your compliance and overview, brochure, those sorts of things, then you can include them there. And then clearly for anything that's commercially sensitive, like business plans, like underwriting guidelines, et cetera, you put those into the data room, and there you can specifically control who can access that information. So once you've done that, you come into capacity and licensing requirements. So this is really, what is it that you're looking for accordingly? So the first question many carriers also ask is, who currently supports the program or has supported it historically. And there you can either enter, specific named carriers, or you can do it by type to say, we've got Lloyd's capacity support or whatever. Then it's sort of, what are you looking for in terms of capacity? Like what kind of capacity are you looking for, and why are you looking for that? And every book of business is different in terms of whether you're looking to diversify, there's been channel conflicts, you're looking for better terms, you want to have claims handling authority. There's a lot of different reasons as to why capacity is being sought. So articulating that out. And then what you're actually looking for in terms of capacity. And by that I mean, what line sizes, what limits, what territorial authorities. And that helps carriers to understand, can I do this, can I not do this, et cetera, et cetera. Agreement types. So are you looking for a binder, a line slip, a prior submit, facility? Are you looking for a fronting arrangement? You may have reinsurers and you're just looking for a front. Do you have minimum financial strength ratings? So we use the AM Best scale from, it doesn't need a rating at all, which is often common in personal lines or SME, to, if you're dealing in specialty lines, typically you need an A minus. If you're dealing with financial institutions, you typically need an S&P rating or an AM Best A+. Do you have specific US and EU license requirements? And again, this just helps carriers understand, do I actually have the licenses to be able to support this? They may be interested in a book, but if they don't have the licenses for it, doesn't really help. So in the US, E&S versus admitted. In the EU, class 1 to 18 for non-life, or for long-term insurance, class 1 to 10. Are there specific commission arrangements that you've got that you want to discuss at this stage or not? Do you have specific program structures and details that go with that? So that's stage 5. Stage 6 then goes into fitness and propriety, and those are, have you had any, has any of the management team basically had any criminal offenses, legal proceedings, bankruptcies, insolvencies? Has there been any PI claims in the last 5 years? For the majority of people, it's no, 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 no. Move on to the next one. Stage 7 is really about marketing options. So it is, what's the title of this program? Are you working towards a specific placement date? Who should the capacity provider contact in regards to this program? That's the program representative. Then confidentiality settings and anonymity settings. We talked about confidentiality settings before. That's the whole Ashley Madison feature around being able to block out specifically named carriers or unrated carriers as a whole. Anonymity settings are a little bit different than confidentiality settings. Anonymity settings are all about being able to hide your identity. So if you want your listing to go up and you don't want potential carriers to know, your name, your register, you don't want them to be able to identify who you are, then you can use anonymity settings. In practice, nobody's really using those. So it's one of the things that we're learning is that what we find in terms of all the programs that are going up is I guess when you delegate authority, there's kind of 2 things that you're delegating. You're delegating the book of business or whatever's being underwritten in terms of class, et cetera. But it's also the people that you're delegating to. And if you don't know the people that you're delegating to, that's 50% of the equation, basically. And so what we find is a lot of people are going, well, wait a second, our identity in terms of who we are and our trading background, et cetera, is a strength, not a weakness. We don't want to hide that. We actually want to do the exact opposite. We want to actually tell people this is us, this is who we are, because that will actually invite more interest from carriers. So that was sort of learning that we go through around it. Last is stage 8, which is all around confirmations and consent. And so the purpose of that is just to say, there's no material inaccuracies in the information that's there. It needs to be signed off by a director or officer of the company seeking capacity. If it is a placing broker, it's acting on behalf of someone, it needs to be the cover holder that, or the proposed cover holder that needs to sign it off to make sure they're comfortable with information then being available on the platform, and then agreement to commercial terms. And the commercial terms is how Capacity Place makes its money. Basically, is it earns 1% of premium income for a period of 3 years as a finder's fee. So we covered off stage 3 KPIs. Okay, so we're on a quick demo now. Okay. So so this is the Capacity Place website. Can you guys all see that? Yeah?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah.
So on here, I mean, you can find a lot of information accordingly in terms of how does it work for different parties. If you're a capacity seeker and want to know how it specifically is relevant to you, you can go into any one of those. If you want to look at how does it work for capacity providers, you can do that as well. Pricing is just the bit that I talked about in terms of 1% and the details in that. Here, what I was just going to show you was the template library. First and foremost. So what we did is, just for the benefit of our community of insurance program professionals, what we did is included a number of templates that are, many of these are hard to find in the market, basically. So ND is fairly easy to find, but where we've created a template, it's got a download. Where there's a link to somebody else that's created a template, you can then just go into those and look at their templates that they've got available. And we're just trying to make basically an information resource here that makes it easy for everyone to to find information that they need to, again, accelerate the process. What we find is that the most popular templates that are downloaded consistently off the website are business plans, program financials, risk profiles, and underwriting guidelines. And those templates, everybody's finding them quite useful because they're structured approaches in terms of how to present information or cross-reference against what you've done. But there's a bunch of other things that are on here, complaints, logs, IPIDs, and we're just building this out, over time accordingly. So hopefully that just, there's a useful information resource. It's in the public site, so anybody can go in there and look at that. So if I go in here as a capacity seeker, I'm just going to go in as I'm going to go into my own companies. So if you come into the site, what you'll see is, what your profile details look like. Accordingly, from here you can go into your programs that you've created along the left-hand side. You've got program summary, permissions, user shares, and add program. So if your program's been shared from a capacity seeker to anybody else, and they punch that in to say share with so-and-so, then you can see that accordingly. Whoever's got permissions to your program, again, you can just go in there. For our purposes, I'm just going to go into program summary. And the program summary lists out all the programs that you've currently have running or available. So I'm just going to go into one that we created right here. This is in draft. Accordingly. I think I mentioned to you the 8 stages the process. So you can just go to the 8 stages are shown kind of at the top around, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. You can either go in that way or you can complete this accordingly and then you can just hit next, each one of them all the way through. One of the things I just wanted to show was the we talked about the Ashley Madison feature, confidentiality options, just because it seems to be the most, sensitive one around there. So here under confidentiality settings, when you get to this section, you can say hide my program from specific risk carriers. And what you see here is a database of just all different risk carriers. And again, there's 13,500 on there. You can pick any name. Go ahead.
That's easy.
Yeah. So, and so, behind the scenes, there's quite an extensive database. But, say, for example, you were supported by Berkshire Hathaway. And what you can see here is all the different Berkshire Hathaway companies accordingly to say, well, I don't want anyone from Berkshire Hathaway direct looking at it. But, we're also today supported by AXA. And AXA is one of those companies with 1,000 different insurers that sits behind it, et cetera, et cetera. So they've got like a gazillion insurers that you can kind of see there. Yeah, and so you kind of go through and say, I don't want anyone from these particular risk carriers looking at my program, and that then just it provides a layer of protection, if you will, in terms of those carriers actually looking at it, and it means that the program then becomes marketed to other capacity providers outside of that. So that's the Leo. Is there anything else on the capacity seeker side that you think we should go through, or is that? Oh yeah, let me just go back to the program bit. Hold on, give me a sec here. Program summary. So up here, if you're in there, what you can always do is you can up on the little right on the gear icon, you can actually view what the program looks like, and this is basically what your program looks like to different capacity providers. So when a capacity provider goes in and sees your program, they would see, here's the program, here's the profile all the way through. So it starts off with, here's the program title, here's who's looking for capacity, here are the products, here's the licenses, here's the KPIs and financials for the program, here's the capacity that's being sought, here's supporting information that's available should it be needed, here's who here's the fitness and propriety checks, et cetera, et cetera. And what that does is that gives capacity providers, sufficient information, almost like a teaser, to say, that looks really interesting. And if I'm interested, then what I will do then, in the capacity provider screen, what they will also get is a button on the right-hand side that says, contact capacity provider. And then from that, they can then go through and from that start a chat, call, email accordingly with the capacity seeker. Sorry, Leo, were you saying something before?
No, carry on.
Okay. So that's basically the teaser sort of thing. If I then sort of log out of here, if I was a capacity provider going in, CP1. So every capacity provider comes in, has certain risk carriers that they represent. Now this is my admin account, so I'm testing things out. So where I said, I work for Berkshire Hathaway. I don't really work for Berkshire Hathaway, and the like. Now what capacity providers can also do is they can actually look here to see what programs are on here. And we talked about recommendations that are here. So what they can do is they can then come in and see, well, what programs are being recommended to me accordingly as a capacity provider. Other than the speed, this being very slow, what will come up in a second, basically is a listing of all of the programs that are out there. Very slow.
The capacity providers also enter their appetites into the system, of course.
Right. So the way that works is it's under matching preferences, and so we've kicked that. So that's a good thing. So maybe I'll go into matching preferences first. So what we've got around matching preferences here is they can come in and specify what is it that they're looking for in terms of classes here.
Yeah.
So they can come in and say, yeah, I'm interested in this. And then they can come in and say, which territories am I interested in? And so here there's a whole structure around territories. It starts off at worldwide ex-US, then at the continent, and then from a continent to a country, and then from country into state or province in the US and Canada. And again, just because it kind of matches up against licenses and other requirements, and they can specify as many of these as they want. And then behind the scenes, there is a matching correlation matrices between every territory that they specify and what the program has on it, and then every class of business and what they specify as well.
But would it also be possible as a capacity seeker to make a selection of the companies or the capacity providers who want to do business, for instance, in the Dutch market where we operate? Can you make a selection of that? Is that possible?
Well, see, the whole issue. The issue there is that capacity providers would actually have to articulate out what their risk appetite is, and the issue that we find is that no capacity provider ever wants to do that. Like basically what we find is that capacity providers tend to be reactive rather than proactive. If you ask them what are you interested in terms of it, they never say that. They never say, because they would say, many of them struggle to even say, here's what our risk appetite is for our own business, let alone program business. So what we've found kind of works better, far better, in how the marketplace works is to say, here's programs that are out there, and let them look at them, and they can then come back to say, yes, I'm interested, or no, I'm not. Because they never turn around and say, well, I'm looking for, I mean, talk to any capacity provider that's out there to say, you know, are you interested in, like, it's more like, can you specify out for me what it is that you're looking for in programs? Right away, they would just back off, and they would say, well, we're not interested in programs. And a lot of times it's because programs are looked at on an exceptional basis. They're not looked at, some will be proactive around saying this is what we're looking for, but the vast majority don't. And the vast majority are reactive rather than proactive. So we've designed this.
I understand the answer.
Yeah, just for the benefit of everyone else, because it's one of those ones that we absolutely, like, we get why you want to do that, and to say, you know, these carriers are interested in this. And the other thing too that we find is that it's often not risk carriers that have appetites; it's individuals within risk carriers that have appetites. And so it's, you know, what's of interest to one division or one department is totally different than another division, another department within it. And sometimes we're trying to make it easier to get it in front of the right people. And so if you've got a program that's there and it's not necessarily of interest to that capacity provider, what we also want to do is to make sure that they could forward that on to another department to say, actually, this program here might be interesting to you guys, but it's not quite interesting to us, either because, you know, I don't cover that class, that territory, that type, that layer, whatever it may happen to be.
Well, I know there's someone from ALG, so I can say this. So if you go to ALG, you talk to 50 people, you get 50 different answers. It's as simple as that. And they all think those 50 individuals, their answer is the right one.
Exactly, yeah. And I'm just going to show you the demo as well that's here. So this is a demo that's on the site. It's all publicly available. But what we did is we just put a few sample programs that are on there. And this is exactly what it looks like for capacity providers. So when they are searching and viewing programs, they can come in here and type in search parameters. They can filter based on class and territory at the moment, and that'll be extended out. They can sort based on a number of different elements accordingly. It's very much like eBay or Amazon as such. And then, you know, once they find something they're interested in, you know, they can take that and say, okay, let me go into this particular program. And when they go into that program, what they see is exactly what we just went through before. Here's the program profile, et cetera. Here's what we're looking for. And then if they're interested, they can then contact the representative for this. Now, I put these together because these are all this is the demo example that's out there, but it's exactly the same as what capacity providers actually see. So just going back to our slides over here, template library, we did Seeker dashboard, we did adding a program all the way through, and we did searching and viewing program listings. Yeah, I think that covers off everything. So I guess I went a bit over on time. I guess I'll open it up for questions now.
Oh, hi Marco, it's Kieran here.
Hi Kieran.
Just a quick question. On your first slide, you mentioned ILS funds. And what current ILS funds do you have on the platform, and how do you see the development of ILS funds in, say, 6 to 18 months' time using your platform?
Yeah, I think we've got one ILS market on there right now, if I'm not mistaken. I have to take a look. But generally, it hasn't been a focus for us because usually the ILS markets are kind of less interested in program business generally because they've been mainly focused on single risk. And it's one of those areas because most ILS funds as well don't have licenses. Every time you deal with an ILS fund, they typically need to have some sort of fronting or transformation capability. So you need to go typically from an ILS fund into an insurer, reinsurer all the way through. It's one of the things that's on our radar map. But where we find most of the demand that's out there in terms of where the programs sit is usually with insurers. Insurers and reinsurers are the two biggest accordingly, and ILS funds will be looked at in due course accordingly.
Okay, smashing. Thank you. Just one more very quick question.
Go ahead.
With regards to the capacity provider, when they access information or when they receive notifications about different programs via the algorithm, which individual in the capacity provider's organization is that normally? Will it be, say, the head of corporate development, the chief underwriting officer, or is it more tailored to the heads of department? So, for example, the head of marine, the head of motor?
So basically, it's whoever signs up. So it's not so much like what we end up having is sometimes you get multiple people from a particular insurer that are on the platform, and because everybody's looking at their own interest, that from a role description or job description, typically it tends to be someone who's more head of underwriting or business development. Is typically the parties that tend to register, because they're the ones that are responsible for incoming business into it. And then what often happens is that multiple people then, if they've got a different scope of responsibility, will typically sign up for what they're interested in accordingly. So, for example, there's a number of people from Zurich that are signed up, and the person that's responsible for Zurich North America is different than the person responsible for Zurich Canada, which is different responsible for the Zurich Europe. Most of who's focused on is their MGA division that they've got a specific department for. In another organization, it'll be someone who's just responsible for a particular line or particular class. And so the way that we see this sort of evolving is that once you're within an organization, they then bring in others into any particular opportunity, or refer that opportunity internally to someone else, which then creates more people signing up.
Okay, cool. Thank you. Smashing. Thank you.
You're welcome. Yeah. So, other questions? Fire away.
Yeah. Can you tell me if a capacity provider wants to underwrite a book of business or a program, then he gets in contact directly with the capacity seeking party? Are you still involved in there? Do you have anything to do with the premiums? Goes it through your system? Do you pay the premium directly? How does claims handling be done? Or are you a marketplace after that also? Or is business done directly after that with the capacity provider?
So our intention basically is to get the parties talking together and dealing together, and then support from afar, but basically let them deal directly accordingly and not try to get in the middle of that accordingly. So post-transaction, we try not to get in. We're not looking to get involved, basically, other than just accepting a finder's fee. But we just know that basically when companies can deal directly, it's just a better relationship. And having run an MGA for several years, as soon as many times when you have someone that's in the middle, that can just get in the way. And what you're really trying to do is expand a relationship, build trust accordingly. And often having monies go to a third party doesn't really help. I mean, it's almost like, tell us what you need. We'll get it to you between the parties. So basically all we're trying to do is get the right people together accordingly, and to make sure that we've got that our finder's fee basically is secured. But basically our job is to get capacity providers to talk with you guys directly, and then you guys can then progress from there. But we're there as kind of, support and help around that, because we often get asked that an awful lot.
Okay. Yeah.
We're not trying to be brokers. What we're trying to be is basically matchmakers. And what we find is that you're the one that's usually in the best position to know your program, to know how you do things, et cetera, and you don't need to have someone translate that for you accordingly. And actually, direct relationships actually is better, smarter, faster, cheaper, all around.
Yeah. Okay. I understand. Can you see on the side who is already working along with you, the companies, or other people's out of the market, or is it? Can you see who's also? Because you could have a competitor in your market who's doing the same business with you. With everything divided, you can't see what everybody else is doing. How can I explain it? It's interesting. Yeah. Oh, no. Never mind. I understand. No. But asking the question is, I'm thinking about the end. Okay. Yeah. No. Leave it with that. I understand. No, it's good.
We try to make sure that nobody else can see your information accordingly. We are in a little bit of a privileged position that we can see a lot of everything that's going on, and we recognize sometimes there's different conflicts, but in being a marketplace, basically our job is to match up the parties, leave it to them. Leave it to the people that are there. What we're looking to do is make sure that there's more relationships that are there so that you're talking with more parties, and then if someone's not moving or someone's being difficult, that you've got choice that's available. That's basically what we're trying to do, and to make sure that other people can't see your information, that you've got far greater control of that. Amazingly, though, we often get asked an awful lot around, can you help us or advise us on how this should be structured, or this or this or this, because we understand basically what's going on in the capacity markets as well in terms of what they're looking for. So often we're shepherding a lot of conversations together accordingly to say, okay, well, I know you guys are looking for this, and so we're often helping out in terms of, well, a different way of doing this is this or this or this. You might want to consider doing this because this is how this is working. And again, just because everyone's different that's out there, we're just trying to make sure that there's maximum connectivity between parties, and the programs are structured so they don't get knocked away right away, that there's conversations that can start up first. It's just what we find also from the capacity provider perspective is they don't want to have conversations until they've seen sufficient information. Because even them, they're, in terms of capacity, they're often like, look, everybody's trying to sell me on relationships or taking me out to dinner or whatever. We're in a position right now where we're just, what I need to see is information. If it comes back and it looks good, then I want to meet them. Then I want to meet these guys that are doing this, this, and this. But if I don't know them, I don't want to waste my time building up relationships, setting up false expectations. So that initial qualification around information helps. I mean, usually when carriers come back at that stage, they're genuinely interested. Like at that stage, if they've reviewed the profile, they're interested. And so what we find basically is that that things progress quicker at that stage, and that's what we're trying to do. Is we're trying to get away from this very long placement cycle. It's like, I find it frustrating that we kind of sit there and you have a carrier that's interested and you're just hanging on, kind of going, well, are they going to sign this deal or not? Can we get it through all that? Kind of just getting to a different way of doing things to say, actually, what we need to be doing is getting out to more carriers all at the same time so that we can create that sense of competition within that, so that people are going to move. So capacity providers will move, and they'll make sure that they prioritize accordingly, so that more programs can be done.
Yeah. Right. Anything else?
No, not for me. No.
Okay. Well, thank you everyone for attending today's webinar. Much appreciated. If there's anything that you guys want to talk about confidentially, just give myself or Leo a ring if there's anything you want to go through. I think our details are I think it's on the front of this. We'll send you the details out anyway. If you haven't already registered, by all means, please go and register on the site at www.capacityplace.com. And we're then now looking to get more programs up, get them in front of more carriers, get more carriers on board, and start to expedite that process. We've only been going 3 months, and there's a number of people on here. I greatly appreciate the initial support. I think from here what we're just starting to see is more and more relationships happening, with a better, smarter way of doing things, hopefully.
Thank you very much. It was a very good and intense presentation. Very good. Yeah.
Great.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And again, we'll send out the slides to everyone and a link to the video in case you want to see it again.
Thank
Great.
you. Thank you very much.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye. Okay.